I was organizing my poetry books when the phone rang. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind that gets lost between calendar pages without leaving a mark. I had retired from teaching just 6 months ago and was still trying to find rhythm in my new routine. Mrs. Lawson, this is Thornton and Associates calling from Texas. Texas. My heart immediately raced. Garrett lived in Texas. I regret to inform you that your brother, Garrett Wilson, passed away in the early hours of yesterday. The book I was holding, an anthology of Emily Dickinson, slipped from my fingers. The dull thud against the carpet seemed to echo in the silence that followed. Garrett, my half-brother 15 years my senior, whom I saw so rarely, but who somehow always represented a constant in my life. Someone who knew I existed, who cared, even from a distance. Your presence is requested for the reading of the will next Monday at the Blackwell Wilson Ranch. Will? Why would they call me for that? Probably some formality. Perhaps a personal item Garrett wanted me to have. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years since his health began to decline after Elaine's death. I booked an economy flight to Dallas and a modest hotel nearby. My retired teacher's salary didn't allow for extravagances, but I needed to say goodbye. While packing my suitcase, I found the last letter Garrett had sent me 3 years ago. Brief, as always, but kind. He asked about my life, mentioned business going well, and there was a line about Mason. I still hope your son realizes the extraordinary woman he has for a mother. Mason. The familiar pain tightened my chest. 10 years without seeing my only child. 10 years of returned birthday cards, unanswered calls, frustrated attempts at reconciliation. After the divorce, Richard poisoned him against me with lies about abandonment and selfishness. How could I have abandoned someone I fought so hard for? The trip to Texas seemed endless. When I finally arrived at the Blackwell Wilson Ranch, I was momentarily breathless. I had visited Garrett only 3 times in my entire life, and the magnitude of the property always impressed me. The main house was a colonial-style mansion with imposing columns and porches that surrounded the entire first floor. Around it, thousands of acres of lush pastures where the famous Hereford cattle grazed peacefully. A man in an impeccable suit greeted me at the entrance. Mrs. Lawson, I'm Maxwell Thornton. Thank you for coming. Please follow me. I was led to a library that occupied the entire west wing of the house. Floor-to-ceiling shelves housed ancient and modern volumes. The central dark wood table was prepared with documents organized in folders. There was no one else in the room. Won't the others be participating? I asked, imagining distant relatives of Elaine's or company executives. There are no others, Mrs. Lawson. The reading of the will is only for you. Confused, I sat in the indicated chair. Thornton adjusted his glasses and began to read the official document in a solemn tone. The first lines were legal formalities that I barely registered until a phrase cut through the air like lightning. I leave the entirety of my assets, including the Blackwell Wilson Ranch, all 500 head of cattle, investments, and bank accounts worth approximately $12 million, to my sister, Audrey Lawson. My entire body froze. Had I heard correctly? There must be some mistake, I whispered. Thornton smiled gently and pushed the will in my direction, pointing to the paragraph in question. There it was, in black and white, my name. There is no mistake, Mrs. Lawson. Your brother was very clear. There is also a personal letter for you. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope he handed me. Garrett's strong, slanted handwriting filled the page. Dear Audrey, if you're reading this, I've left this world. Elaine and I never had children to leave our legacy to, and you are the only true family I have left. Over the years, I've observed how you maintained your integrity even in the most difficult times. You never sought me out for personal gain, even when I know you went through financial difficulties after your divorce. This inheritance is not just a gift, it's a recognition of your character. Use it wisely, live well, and if possible, continue the charitable work that Elaine and I began. With love, your brother Garrett. Tears blurred my vision. Suddenly, I was no longer a retired teacher with a limited budget, but the owner of one of the most important ranches in Texas and a fortune I never dreamed of possessing. What do I do now? I asked, more to myself than to Thornton. Now, Mrs. Lawson, he replied with a slight smile, you begin your new life. The news of Garrett's will spread through the county like wildfire. By the time of the funeral 2 days later, the small church was filled not only with genuine mourners, but also with curious onlookers eager to glimpse the unknown sister who had suddenly inherited the Blackwell-Wilson empire. I stood alone in the front pew, accepting condolences from people I'd never met, each whispering how Garrett had spoken highly of me. Had he? The brother I remembered was reserved, kind but distant. The idea that he had discussed me with these strangers seemed almost surreal. After the service, Thornton hosted a reception at the ranch. I found myself in Garrett's study, now my study, staring at photographs of him and Elaine, their smiling faces at charity galas, on horseback, at cattle auctions, a life I knew nothing about. Mrs. Lawson? A tall man with silver hair appeared at the doorway. Joseph Martinez, head of security. I worked for your brother for 20 years. Please call me Audrey, I said automatically, still uncomfortable with the formality. Mr. Wilson instructed me to give you this after the funeral. He handed me a small tablet. It's access to the ranch's security system. He wanted you to feel safe here. I thanked him, wondering why I would need a security system on a remote ranch. Little did I know how prescient Garrett's concerns would prove to be. That evening, as guests gradually departed, I retreated to the master bedroom, another space that felt like an intrusion into someone else's life. The king-sized bed with its handcrafted headboard dwarfed me. I was about to change into my nightgown when a commotion downstairs caught my attention. Voices, one raised, insistent, one I hadn't heard in over a decade but would recognize anywhere. Mason. My heart hammered against my ribs as I hurried downstairs. There he was, my son, standing in the grand foyer. Older, his dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples, but unmistakably the boy I'd raised. The boy who had chosen his father over me and then disappeared from my life completely. Mom. His voice had deepened over the years. His eyes, so like mine, assessed me quickly before scanning the opulent surroundings. I came as soon as I heard about Uncle Garrett. Uncle Garrett, a man he'd met perhaps twice in his life, suddenly an uncle. Mason, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. This is unexpected. He stepped forward, arms awkwardly opening for an embrace that felt more performed than genuine. I know it's been a while. I should have reached out sooner. A while. 10 years of silence reduced to a while. How did you hear about Garrett? I asked, genuinely curious. It's all over the news. Unknown schoolteacher inherits Blackwell-Wilson fortune. Your picture's even in the Dallas Morning News. His laugh sounded forced. Quite the surprise. Before I could respond, he continued, his voice taking on a concerned tone that didn't quite reach his eyes. Look at this place, Mom. It's enormous. The cattle operation alone is more than one person could handle. He gestured expansively around us. You've never run anything like this. You've never even owned property larger than our old house. I opened my mouth to object, but he pressed on. You're going to need help. Professional help. His expression softened to something practiced. Mom, you're going to need me to help you with all this. The presumption in his tone, the immediate assumption that I was incapable, sparked something inside me. Before I could respond, he delivered his coup de grace. You won't be able to handle this all alone. Now you're going to need me to help you. The way he said it, not an offer but a declaration, as if I should be grateful for his sudden appearance after a decade of rejection, made my spine stiffen. That's very considerate, Mason, I began carefully. He was already talking over me, mentioning how he could take the burden off my hands and suggesting I might be more comfortable in a smaller place in town while he managed things here. I was about to respond when I noticed Thornton and Martinez had appeared silently in the doorway behind Mason. Their expressions were neutral, professional, but their presence reminded me of something Thornton had mentioned earlier. There were additional provisions in Garrett's will that we hadn't yet discussed. Mason, I said, finding unexpected strength in my voice. Before we discuss any arrangements, I need to finish reviewing the full terms of Garrett's will with Mr. Thornton. As if on cue, Thornton stepped forward, his leather portfolio in hand. Mrs. Lawson is correct. There are several specific conditions in the will that require immediate attention. Mason turned, noticing the two men for the first time. And you are? Maxwell Thornton, Mr. Wilson's attorney, and this is Joseph Martinez, head of security. The word security caused a flicker in Mason's expression, something between surprise and wariness. Perhaps, Thornton continued smoothly. We should all sit down in the library and review these conditions together, since they directly address family involvement in the estate. As Mason took 2 instinctive steps backward, I realized this homecoming was about to take a turn neither of us had anticipated. The library felt smaller with the 4 of us inside. Mason sat across from me, his confidence visibly diminishing as Thornton methodically arranged documents on the polished table. Martinez stood by the door, his presence quietly authoritative. Mrs. Lawson, as we discussed earlier, you are the sole heir to your brother's estate, Thornton began, his voice measured. However, Mr. Wilson included several specific conditions that activate should any family members who have been absent suddenly express interest in the inheritance. Mason shifted uncomfortably. I couldn't help but notice how his eyes kept darting around the room, assessing everything with an appraiser's calculation. What kind of conditions? I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. Thornton opened a sealed envelope and extracted several pages. First, Mrs. Lawson retains complete control over all assets. No property, funds, or business interests can be transferred to any family member, particularly those with whom she has had limited contact in recent years, without a minimum 2-year probationary period. The implication hung in the air. Mason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. During this period, Thornton continued, any family member wishing to participate in the management of the estate must demonstrate genuine commitment to both the business and to Mrs. Lawson's well-being. As determined solely by Mrs. Lawson herself, he paused, letting the words sink in. Furthermore, Mr. Wilson appointed 2 trusted managers who will report directly to Mrs. Lawson while she learns the business operations. They have been with the ranch for over 15 years and are explicitly instructed to prevent any hasty changes in management. Mason's face had paled slightly. These seemed like unusual restrictions for a family inheritance. Mr. Wilson was unusually perceptive, Thornton replied without missing a beat. He believed strongly in protecting his sister's interests. Martinez cleared his throat softly. I should also mention that per Mr. Wilson's instructions, the entire property has been equipped with comprehensive security systems, including audio and video monitoring in all common areas. The implication was clear. Everything being said right now was being recorded. Mason stared at Martinez, then at me, clearly recalibrating whatever approach he had planned. He took 2 distinct steps backward, his body language shifting from presumptive to defensive. I'm just trying to help my mother, he said, his voice strained with forced sincerity. After all, we're family. Family, I repeated softly. The word weighted with a decade of unanswered calls and returned birthday cards. Thornton extracted one final document from his portfolio. There is one more element you should be aware of, Mrs. Lawson. Your brother commissioned a comprehensive background report on all potential interested parties following his diagnosis. This information is confidential, but he instructed me to inform you that it exists and contains significant details that would be relevant should anyone contest the will's conditions. I watched as the color drained completely from Mason's face. Whatever was in that report, whatever Garrett had discovered about my son's life during our years of estrangement, was clearly something Mason didn't want revealed. That won't be necessary, Mason said quickly. I have no intention of contesting anything. For the first time since he'd arrived, I truly looked at my son, not through the lens of maternal longing or past hurt, but with clear eyes. The designer watch that seemed too expensive for someone between jobs. The practice charm that never quite reached his eyes. The immediate pivot to financial concerns rather than genuine connection after 10 years apart. What had Richard taught our son during those formative years after our divorce? What values had shaped the man standing before me now? Mason, I said, finding a steadiness in my voice I hadn't known I possessed, I appreciate your concern for my welfare. But Garrett has ensured I have all the support I need while I learn to manage this responsibility. I stood up, surprising myself with my next words. If you genuinely want to reconnect after all these years, I would welcome that, as mother and son, not as business partners or financial advisors. The challenge hung between us. For a moment, something flashed across his face, perhaps a glimmer of the boy I'd raised, the child who once brought me wildflowers, just because. But it vanished quickly, replaced by careful calculation. Of course, he said finally, family first. Always. The hollowness of the statement echoed in the book-lined room. Thornton and Martinez exchanged a glance I couldn't quite interpret. "Where are you staying, Mason?" I asked, suddenly exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the day. "I haven't arranged anything yet. I came straight from the airport." Of course he had. No hotel reservation, because he'd assumed he would simply move into the ranch house, into Garrett's empire, into my inheritance. "There's a guest house on the property," I offered, surprising myself with the suggestion. "You're welcome to stay there while you're in town." Hope flickered across his features, quickly masked by casual acceptance. "That would be great, thanks." As Martinez led Mason out to show him to the guest house, Thornton remained behind with me. "Your brother anticipated this scenario with remarkable accuracy," he observed quietly. I sank back into my chair, the weight of the day finally catching up with me. "What was in that report he commissioned, Mr. Thornton?" The attorney hesitated. "Are you certain you want to know, Mrs. Lawson?" I thought about the son I'd raised, the years of separation, the man who had just tried to maneuver his way into controlling my inheritance within minutes of our reunion. Not tonight, I decided, but keep it close at hand. Something tells me I'll need it sooner rather than later. As I gazed out the window at the vast ranch that was now mine, I realized Garrett hadn't just left me a fortune. He'd given me something far more valuable, the power to define my relationships on my own terms for the first time in my life. Dawn broke over the ranch with a spectacular palette of oranges and pinks. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with too many revelations to process. Standing on the sprawling porch with a cup of coffee warming my hands, I watched as ranch hands moved efficiently between outbuildings, beginning their day's work. My day's work, my ranch, my responsibility. A truck approached, dust billowing behind it. An older woman with salt and pepper hair pulled into a practical braid stepped out, her weathered face breaking into a smile when she spotted me. "Mrs. Lawson, I'm Eleanor Winters, ranch manager. Thought I'd come introduce myself before the morning gets away from us." Her handshake was firm, her eyes direct. I liked her immediately. "Please, call me Audrey. I'm still adjusting to all this." "Understandable. Garrett spoke highly of you, though he kept pretty quiet about his plans." She gestured toward the expansive property. "I've been running operations here for 15 years. Whenever you're ready for the grand tour, just say the word." Before I could respond, the guest house door opened and Mason emerged. Even from a distance, I could see the calculation in his posture as he assessed Eleanor. "My son," I explained as he approached. "He arrived yesterday." Eleanor's expression remained neutral, but something knowing flickered in her eyes. "Mr. Wilson mentioned a nephew might appear." Of course he had. Garrett had anticipated everything. Mason joined us, charm turned to maximum as he introduced himself to Eleanor. I watched their interaction with new awareness, noting how he peppered her with questions about the ranch operations, cattle prices, and property values. Not once did he ask about Garrett himself, the man whose funeral had ostensibly brought him here. "I have extensive business experience," Mason was saying. "I'd be happy to review the ranch finances, give a fresh perspective." Eleanor's smile remained polite but cool. "The quarterly audit was just completed last month. Everything's in order, but thank you for the offer." After Eleanor excused herself to continue her morning rounds, Mason turned to me, his expression earnest. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said last night, about reconnecting as family." Hope flickered briefly in my chest. Had my words reached him after all? "I realize I've been absent too long," he continued. "There's so much to catch up on. Maybe we could start with you showing me around? I'd love to understand what Uncle Garrett built here." It seemed like a reasonable request, a son wanting to understand his mother's new world, yet something in his too eager tone gave me pause. "I'd like that," I said carefully, though I'm still learning everything myself. As we walked the property, I shared what little I knew about the operations. Mason listened intently, occasionally suggesting improvements or modernizations that might maximize returns. Each suggestion subtly positioned him as a potential decision-maker, a natural successor to leadership. We approached a small, modern building set apart from the others. "Garrett's private office," I explained, recalling Martinez's brief property overview. "Thornton mentioned he kept his most important documents here." Mason's interest visibly sharpened. "We should probably review those, make sure everything's in order." "Thornton and the ranch attorneys have already handled that," I replied, remembering the attorney's assurances that all legal matters were being thoroughly processed. "Still, as family, we should have our own understanding of things." Mason stepped toward the building, then frowned at the keypad lock on the door. "Do you have the code?" I shook my head. Martinez said he'd provide access once the initial legal review is complete. Frustration briefly clouded Mason's features before he masked it with a shrug. "No rush, we have time." Later that afternoon, I retreated to Garrett's, my study, to gather my thoughts. The enormity of my new situation was beginning to sink in. Not just the wealth and property, but the responsibility. Dozens of employees depended on the ranch for their livelihoods. The Blackwell-Wilson name carried weight in the community, supporting local businesses and charities. While searching for a notepad, I discovered a leather-bound journal in the desk drawer. Opening it revealed Garrett's distinctive handwriting, a personal diary spanning the last 5 years of his life. My first instinct was to close it, respecting his privacy, but a glimpse of my own name caught my eye. "Spoke with the investigator about Audrey's son today," read an entry from 2 years ago. The report confirms my suspicions. 3 failed businesses, each ending with investors losing everything while he walked away unscathed. Currently involved in a property scheme targeting elderly homeowners in Florida. Richard taught him well, it seems. The same charm, the same absence of conscience. My hands trembled as I continued reading. Garrett had been monitoring Mason for years, concerned that my son might someday try to take advantage of me. The diary detailed a pattern of behavior that made my blood run cold. Financial manipulations, broken promises, even a short-lived marriage to a wealthy widow 40 years his senior. "Audrey deserves to know the truth," Garrett had written, "but revealing it would only cause her pain. Better to protect her with the will's conditions and hope she discovers his true nature herself. She's stronger than she knows." A soft noise at the doorway made me look up. Mason stood there, watching me with an unreadable expression. "Finding anything interesting?" he asked, his casual tone belied by the intensity of his gaze. I closed the journal, sliding it back into the drawer. "Just trying to understand Garrett's filing system." He stepped into the room, eyes scanning the space with that same assessing look I was beginning to recognize. "Mom, I've been thinking. This place is overwhelming for someone not used to wealth. Maybe you should consider selling and investing the proceeds. I know some excellent financial advisors in Miami." Miami, where, according to Garrett's journal, Mason had left a string of questionable business dealings. "I'm not considering selling," I said firmly. "Garrett and Elaine built this legacy, and I intend to honor it." Something hardened in Mason's expression. "That's the emotional decision, not a practical one. This place requires expertise to manage properly." "Expertise I have access to through Eleanor and the team Garrett assembled," I countered, a new resolve strengthening my voice. "I may be new to ranching, but I'm not new to learning, Mason. I taught for 30 years. I know how to educate myself." He stared at me, clearly reassessing. The mother he remembered, the one who had deferred to Richard's financial decisions, who had tried so desperately to maintain connection with her son that she'd accepted his increasingly cold treatment, was not the woman standing before him now. "Of course," he said finally, his charm sliding back into place. "I just want what's best for you." As he left, I remained seated, Garrett's journal a silent witness to the truth hidden beneath Mason's sudden concern. My brother had given me more than wealth. He had given me insight, and with it, the chance to finally see my son clearly, without the distorting lens of maternal hope. The question was, what would I do with this painful knowledge? A week passed, settling into an uneasy rhythm. Each morning, I met with different department managers, absorbing information about cattle operations, land management, and finances. Each afternoon, Mason found reasons to join these meetings, offering unsolicited suggestions that inevitably positioned him as an essential advisor to my inexperienced perspective. The southeastern pastures could be developed into luxury housing, he proposed during one such meeting. The property values would triple overnight. Eleanor had exchanged glances with Martinez across the conference table. "Those pastures contain protected wetlands, Mr. Lawson. Development would violate both state regulations and the conservation easement Mr. Wilson established." Mason had smiled tightly. "Just thinking outside the box." Outside the box indeed. I was beginning to see a pattern in his suggestions. Each would generate quick cash while dismantling the sustainable infrastructure Garrett and Elaine had built. On the 8th day, I found Eleanor in the barn, examining a newborn calf. "Healthy little heifer," she said, gently stroking the animal's copper coat. "Part of our breeding program. Garrett was particularly proud of these bloodlines. I watched the calf nuzzle its mother, finding unexpected peace in the simple interaction. Eleanor, may I ask you something personal? Shoot, what was my brother really like? As a boss? As a person? Eleanor straightened, considering her answer carefully. Fair. Demanded excellence but recognized hard work. After Elaine's diagnosis, he became more focused on legacy, not just the business success, but what they were leaving behind. She gestured around us. This ranch employs 67 people full-time, supports their families. The Blackwell Wilson Foundation funds the county hospital, scholarships for local kids, the food bank. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. I knew so little about his life. He knew about yours, though, Eleanor said quietly. Kept tabs, especially after your divorce. Worried about you. And about Mason, I added, thinking of the journal entries. Eleanor's expression confirmed my suspicion. Mr. Wilson was concerned about certain influences in your son's life. Before I could press further, my phone chimed with a text from Thornton. Need to speak with you privately. Coming to the ranch at 3 p.m. The attorney arrived precisely on time, his usual portfolio tucked under his arm. We settled in my study, I was finally beginning to think of it as mine, with the door firmly closed. Mrs. Lawson, I wanted to update you on some financial matters, he began, opening a folder. Our audit has revealed several attempts to access ranch accounts from an unrecognized device. My stomach tightened. Successful attempts? No. The security protocols Mr. Wilson established are quite robust. However, he handed me a printout, the attempts originated from the guest house. Last night between 2 and 4 a.m. Mason, trying to access accounts while I slept. There's more, Thornton continued, extracting another document. Mr. Martinez conducted a routine security sweep of the guest house yesterday during your meeting with the cattle broker. He found this. A photograph showed a sophisticated electronic device partially hidden behind a ventilation grate. A recording device, Thornton explained. Positioned to capture conversations in the main house's study, your study, where you conduct most business meetings. Cold anger washed through me. Not only was Mason attempting to access accounts without authorization, he was spying on my private business discussions. I see, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. What are my options? Thornton outlined several approaches, from direct confrontation to legal action. As we talked, a plan began forming in my mind. Not just a reaction to Mason's betrayal, but a proactive strategy that might address multiple concerns at once. I'd like to make some changes to my will, I said suddenly. Thornton raised an eyebrow. Already? You've only just inherited. Precisely. No one would question me putting affairs in order after such a major life change. I leaned forward. And I'd like to schedule a foundation meeting. I understand Garrett and Elaine were significant philanthropists? Indeed, the Blackwell Wilson Foundation distributes approximately $2 million annually to various causes. Perfect. The pieces were falling into place. One more thing, I added. Is there a particular room in this house where we can be certain of complete privacy? No possibility of external monitoring? Thornton smiled slightly. Mr. Wilson's secure conference room, regularly swept for devices. Martinez can arrange access. The next morning, I invited Mason to join me for breakfast on the veranda. He arrived looking pleased with himself, clearly interpreting the invitation as progress in his campaign to establish himself as my essential advisor. I've been doing some thinking, I began, pouring coffee into his cup. You're right that I have much to learn about managing this inheritance. His expression brightened visibly. I'm glad you're seeing things clearly, Mom. I only want to help. I know, I said, forcing warmth into my smile. That's why I've scheduled a meeting with the foundation board tomorrow. I thought you might accompany me, see that side of Garrett's legacy. The charity work? He couldn't quite hide his lack of enthusiasm. Sure, if you think it's important. Very important. Apparently, Garrett was deeply involved in community support. I took a sip of coffee, watching him over the rim. I'm also updating my will. Seems prudent, given the circumstances. That caught his attention. His eyes sharpened instantly. Sensible precaution. I'd be happy to recommend some estate planners I know. Thornton is handling it. The preliminary draft should be ready for review tomorrow. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. The foundation meeting, the will review, the implications of both for his access to the fortune he coveted. I appreciate you including me in these decisions, he said, reaching for my hand with well-practiced sincerity. I squeezed his fingers gently, thinking of the recording device hidden in the guest house, the midnight attempts to access accounts, the decade of silence before money entered the equation. Of course, I replied, matching his sincerity with my own performance. After all, we're family. As he left for a business call that I suspected involved reporting this promising development to whoever was backing his efforts, I gazed across the ranch that had become my responsibility. The cattle grazing peacefully, the workers moving purposefully between tasks, the land stretching toward the horizon, all of it representing not just wealth, but community, sustainability, legacy. Mason saw only dollar signs. I was beginning to see possibility, not just for myself, but for the good this fortune could do in the right hands. And I was increasingly certain those hands were not my son's. The Blackwell Wilson Foundation headquarters occupied a modest building in downtown Dallas, its simple exterior belying the significant impact of its work. As Mason and I entered the conference room, 8 board members rose to greet us, a diverse group ranging from community leaders to financial experts, all connected by their commitment to Garrett and Elaine's philanthropic vision. Mrs. Lawson, welcome, said Dr. Helen Chen, the foundation's chairperson. We've been eager to meet you. I introduced Mason, noting how his eyes scanned the room, likely assessing influence and power rather than the mission statements displayed on the walls: food security, educational access, healthcare equity, environmental conservation. As you know, Dr. Chen began once we were seated, your brother established this foundation 20 years ago. We currently oversee 4 major initiatives and dozens of smaller grants throughout the region. A presentation followed, detailing programs that fed thousands of children, provided college scholarships to rural students, supported the county hospital, and protected critical wildlife habitats. The annual budget of just over $2 million was managed with remarkable efficiency, with administrative costs kept below 8%. Impressive work, I commented sincerely when the presentation concluded. Garrett and Elaine created something truly meaningful. We're particularly proud of the emergency food program, added Robert Gonzalez, another board member. It serves over 3,000 families monthly. Mason shifted in his chair, his impatience barely concealed. All very admirable. But what's the return on investment? Surely these funds could generate more impact if professionally managed. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The return, Dr. Chen said carefully, is measured in lives improved, Mr. Lawson, not percentage points. Of course, Mason backpedaled smoothly. I simply meant we could potentially help even more people with optimal financial strategies. I watched this exchange with growing clarity. The foundation's work, feeding hungry children, supporting education, protecting the environment, held no intrinsic value to Mason. He saw only resources that could be redirected, optimized, controlled. Actually, I said, I've been considering increasing the foundation's annual budget. Mason's head snapped toward me. The board members straightened in their chairs. Garrett and Elaine were clearly passionate about this work, I continued. I'd like to honor that by expanding our impact, particularly in the food security program. That's very generous, Dr. Chen managed, clearly surprised. An increased budget would allow us to reach several underserved communities we've identified. Let's discuss specific proposals at our next meeting, I suggested. For today, I'd appreciate the board's insight on another matter. I outlined a new initiative I'd been contemplating, a sustainable agriculture training program for low-income residents, teaching skills while producing food for the community. The idea had formed during my conversations with Eleanor about the ranch's farming operations, combining education with practical impact. The board's enthusiasm was immediate and genuine. Ideas flowed freely, partnerships with local schools, internship opportunities, potential locations. Throughout this discussion, Mason remained conspicuously silent. His earlier engagement evaporated now that money was flowing outward rather than inward. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Chen pulled me aside. Your brother would be proud, she said quietly. He always hoped the foundation would grow under new leadership. I'm still learning, I admitted. But this feels right. Mason remained unusually quiet during our drive back to the ranch. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a carefully measured tone. That was quite a commitment you made. Increasing the foundation budget will significantly impact the estate's liquidity. The ranch generates substantial annual income, I pointed out. According to the financial reports, Garrett consistently directed a portion to philanthropy while still growing the core business. But that was Garrett's decision. You're not obligated to continue his charitable interests at the expense of other priorities. The unspoken other priorities hung between us. His priorities, his plans for wealth that had never been his to control. Back at the ranch, Thornton was waiting with the preliminary will I had requested. Mason's demeanor instantly shifted from brooding to attentive as we gathered in the secure conference room, the one place I could be certain our conversation wasn't being recorded by whatever devices he might have planted. This is just a first draft, Thornton explained, distributing folders. We can make adjustments as needed. I watched Mason from the corner of my eye as he scanned the document. His expression remained neutral until he reached the distribution of assets section. Then his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the paper. 50% to the Blackwell Wilson Foundation, he read aloud, unable to completely mask his dismay, for the expansion of existing programs and development of the new agricultural initiative, I confirmed. The remaining assets would be divided between a trust for long-term ranch operations and personal bequests. Mason flipped to the personal bequests section, scanning quickly for his name. Finding it, he relaxed marginally, until he processed the details. A conditional bequest, Mason repeated, his voice strained. Subject to demonstration of genuine commitment to the ranch operations and charitable mission, as determined by an independent panel? Similar to the conditions Garrett placed on his will, I noted calmly, ensuring that anyone benefiting from this wealth shares the values behind it. Mason's carefully constructed facade cracked momentarily. This is, he caught himself, forcing his features back into concerned solicitousness. This seems unnecessarily complicated, Mom. Families shouldn't have to prove themselves worthy of inheritance, shouldn't they? I met his gaze directly. What makes someone deserving of wealth they didn't earn, Mason? Blood relation alone? The question hung in the air between us. Thornton, sensing the tension, suggested we review the document individually and reconvene the next day with any proposed revisions. As Mason left, rather abruptly, Thornton gathered his papers with measured precision. An illuminating exercise, he observed once we were alone. Very, I agreed, though not the final version I intend to implement. The attorney raised an eyebrow, but didn't press for details. Mrs. Lawson, if I may be so bold, you've handled this situation with remarkable composure. Many in your position would be overwhelmed. I considered his words, surprised to realize their truth. Somehow, amid the whirlwind of inheritance, reunion, and betrayal, I had found an unexpected steadiness, a clarity of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Teaching high school science for 3 decades prepares you for many things, Mr. Thornton, including recognizing when someone is failing a test. The storm broke just after midnight. Not just the thunderstorm that had been building across the Texas sky all evening, but the confrontation that had been brewing since Mason's arrival. I was awakened by Martinez's urgent knock. Mrs. Lawson, there's a situation you should be aware of. In the security office, Martinez showed me live footage from cameras I hadn't known existed. Mason, clearly intoxicated, was attempting to access Garrett's private office. The keypad lock repeatedly flashed red as he tried various combinations. Should I intervene? Martinez asked. Not yet, I decided, watching my son's increasingly frustrated attempts. But stay close. I pulled on a robe and made my way downstairs, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled across the property. By the time I reached the connecting path to the office building, Mason had given up on the keypad and was examining the windows for potential entry. Looking for something? I called over the storm's din. He whirled around, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. For a moment, naked calculation showed on his face before he attempted to compose his features. Mom, I was just checking the security. This storm? He gestured vaguely at the building. At midnight? By testing the keypad with multiple codes? His expression hardened, the pretense dropping away like a discarded mask. You've been watching me. Garrett watched over this ranch carefully. I'm simply continuing his practices. Lightning illuminated the space between us, thunder following almost immediately. We were both getting soaked, but neither moved toward shelter. Why are you really here, Mason? I asked, the question I'd been holding back since his arrival finally breaking free. After 10 years of silence, why now? You're my mother, he replied automatically. I heard about Uncle Garrett. Stop. My voice cut through the rain. No more lies. No more manipulation. The truth, Mason. For once. Something shifted in his expression. A calculation. A decision. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its practiced warmth. Fine. The truth? I'm here because you suddenly have something worth my time. He gestured toward the main house. All this. The money. The property. Assets that should rightfully come to me eventually anyway. The cold honesty was almost refreshing after days of pretense. And the 10 years before? The returned birthday cards? The ignored calls when I tried to maintain some relationship? He shrugged, water streaming from his shoulders. What was the point? You had nothing I needed. The words should have devastated me. Strangely, they didn't. Perhaps I'd already accepted this truth in my heart long before he confirmed it aloud. Did your father teach you that? That people are only valuable for what they can give you? Dad taught me to be practical, Mason countered. To recognize opportunity and seize it. To stop wasting time on emotional attachments that offer no return. Richard's influence distilled to its poisonous essence. My ex-husband had always valued transactions over relationships, seeing people as either assets or obstacles. Now his worldview spoke through our son's mouth, shaped by years of calculated mentorship. And this? I gestured toward Garrett's office. Breaking in is practical? I need to see the financial records myself, he admitted, dropping all pretense now. Your little will stunt today made it clear you're planning to divert assets to strangers instead of your own son. I have investors waiting on my confirmation that I can deliver what I promised. Investors? The pieces clicked into place. You've already leveraged your supposed inheritance, haven't you? Made commitments based on money you don't control. His silence was confirmation enough. How much do you owe, Mason? Lightning flashed again, illuminating the desperation that briefly crossed his face. Enough that I can't go back to Miami without a solution. At last, the truth, not just opportunism, but necessity had driven his sudden reappearance. Not a son seeking reconciliation, but a desperate man fleeing consequences. I could help you, I said quietly. Not with control of the ranch or foundation, but enough to clear your debts. Hope flickered across his features, quickly replaced by suspicion. In exchange for what? Honesty. A genuine attempt at rebuilding some kind of relationship. Not as business partners, or as manipulator and target, but as mother and son. He stared at me through the rain, weighing options, calculating advantages. When he finally spoke, his voice held a trace of the little boy I'd once known. Uncertain, unguarded. I don't know how to do that anymore. Neither do I admitted. But we could try. For a moment, something like genuine emotion crossed his face. Then the mask slipped back into place, his expression hardening. And if I'm not interested in your terms, if I contest the will, make legal claims as your only child, then you should know that Garrett left extensive documentation of your activities in Florida. The investment schemes, the elderly victims, all of it. I hadn't wanted to use this leverage, but he'd left me no choice. Martinez has already provided copies to the relevant authorities as a precaution. Mason went completely still. You're bluffing. Am I? Your father taught you practicality. My brother taught me protection. I softened my tone. It doesn't have to end this way, Mason. We have choices. The rain continued to fall between us, years of distance condensed into feet of storm-swept darkness. When he finally responded, his voice was cold with finality. You've changed. Yes, I acknowledged. I have. He turned without another word, stalking back toward the guest house. I watched him go, the weight of maternal grief balanced against the certainty that I had finally seen my son clearly, without illusion or desperate hope coloring my perception. Martinez materialized from the shadows. Are you all right, Mrs. Lawson? No, I admitted, but I will be. In the morning, the guest house was empty. Mason had left some time before dawn, taking only what he had brought with him. No note, no goodbye, just absence, the state that had defined our relationship for a decade. Thornton called mid-afternoon. Airport security confirms he boarded a flight to Miami. Do you want us to monitor his movements further? No, I decided. He's made his choice. As I hung up, I found myself standing before the portrait of Garrett and Elaine that hung in the main hallway. Their expressions were serious but kind, their hands clasped together in quiet solidarity. I understand now, I told their painted faces, why you left everything to me, not just because I was family, but because you knew I would protect what matters. Outside, the ranch continued its rhythms, cattle being moved between pastures, equipment being repaired, life flowing onward. My life now, with all its unexpected responsibilities and possibilities. The son who had returned for wealth had departed when faced with the cost of genuine connection. The pain of that reality would linger, but it no longer defined me. Instead, I found myself looking forward, considering not what I had lost, but what I might build with the legacy I'd been entrusted. A legacy that extended far beyond bank accounts and property deeds to the lives touched by the foundation, the community supported by the ranch, the potential for good that wealth properly managed could achieve. I picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Chen's number. About that agricultural training program we discussed, I began. I'd like to move forward immediately. The first step of many in a journey I never expected, but was increasingly ready to embrace. 3 months passed with the relentless rhythm of ranch life marking time. Cattle rotations, equipment maintenance, endless paperwork that somehow translated into the thriving operation around me. I had traded my small apartment in Kansas for this sprawling property, my quiet retirement for days filled with decisions and learning. The strangest part was how natural it had begun to feel. The North Pasture irrigation system needs upgrading, Eleanor informed me during our morning meeting. The estimate came in at $85,000. 3 months ago, such a sum would have seemed astronomical. Now I simply nodded, reviewing the proposal with newly trained eyes. The water conservation features justify the cost. Let's proceed. Eleanor smiled approvingly. Garrett would have made the same call. Such comparisons no longer intimidated me. I was not trying to be Garrett, could never be Garrett, but I was growing into the responsibility he had entrusted to me, finding my own approach while honoring the foundation he had built. After approving the irrigation project, I turned my attention to the day's main event. The Blackwell-Wilson Agricultural Training Center was having its official groundbreaking ceremony, the first major initiative I had spearheaded as foundation chair. The 5-acre property on the ranch's eastern edge had been transformed from unused land into the beginnings of a teaching facility. Phase 1 included classrooms, demonstration gardens, and a small processing facility where participants would learn to grow, harvest, and prepare nutritious food while gaining marketable skills. As I drove to the site, I thought about the journey of the past 3 months. Mason's departure had left a wound, one that might never fully heal, but also a clarity that had propelled me forward. Without the distraction of his manipulations, I had immersed myself in understanding both the business and philanthropic aspects of my inheritance. The ceremony site was already busy when I arrived. Foundation board members, local officials, media representatives, and most importantly, the first cohort of program participants. 20 people ranging from teenagers to seniors, all from underserved communities, all eager for the opportunity this program represented. Dr. Chen greeted me warmly. "Ready for your first official foundation speech?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I admitted, reviewing my notes one final time. When the time came, I approached the podium with unexpected steadiness. The faces before me, expectant, hopeful, curious, reminded me of my classroom days. This was just another form of teaching, another way to create opportunity. "Thank you all for coming today," I began. When my brother Garrett left me this responsibility, I had no idea what to do with it. I was a retired school teacher suddenly in charge of a ranching empire and a significant foundation. To say I was overwhelmed would be an understatement. A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience. But as I learned about the work Garrett and Elaine had done, not just building wealth, but using it to strengthen this community, I began to understand the true value of this inheritance. Not the dollars in accounts or acres of land, but the potential to create meaningful change. I gestured toward the training center site, where construction equipment stood ready. This center represents that potential. By combining education with practical skills and food production, we address multiple needs simultaneously. Participants gain valuable training and certification. The community gains locally grown food for schools and food banks. And together, we build a more resilient local economy. The speech continued, outlining the program specifics and acknowledging the many partners who had helped bring the vision to reality. As I spoke, I noticed a figure at the back of the gathering, a man in a police uniform watching intently. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place why. After the ceremonial turning of dirt with golden shovels, I mingled with guests, answering questions about the program and the Foundation's future plans. The uniformed man approached eventually, removing his hat as he drew near. "Mrs. Lawson? Sheriff Michael Dawson. We haven't formally met, but I worked with your brother on several community initiatives." Up close, I realized why he had seemed familiar. Something in his bearing reminded me of Garrett, that same quiet authority. "Sheriff Dawson, thank you for coming today." "Impressive project," he said, gesturing toward the construction site. "Though I'm not surprised. Garrett always spoke highly of you, said you had a teacher's heart for seeing potential where others missed it." The comment caught me off guard. He said that, even though we saw each other so rarely? Distance doesn't always mean disconnect, Mrs. Lawson. He kept tabs on your teaching awards, your students' success stories, quite proud of his little sister, though he wasn't one to show sentiment openly. Something warm unfurled in my chest, the realization that while I had been living my modest life in Kansas, my brother had been watching from afar, seeing value in my work that had nothing to do with financial success. "I wish I'd known him better," I admitted. "You're continuing his legacy in your own way," the sheriff observed. "That's a form of knowing." After the ceremony concluded, I returned to the main house, my mind still processing the sheriff's revelations. In my study, truly mine now, reorganized to reflect my own preferences, I found myself opening Garrett's journal again. This time, reading not for information about Mason, but for glimpses of my brother's thoughts about me. Audrey received another teaching award, read an entry from 5 years earlier. Regional recognition for her science program, always the quiet achiever, making difference without fanfare. Reminds me of Mother in that way. Another, dated shortly after my divorce. Richard continues to poison the boy against her. Infuriating to witness. Considered intervention, but Audrey needs to navigate this herself. Strength is there, though she may not recognize it yet. And most poignantly, an entry from his final year. Made decision about the will today. Elaine agrees completely. Audrey is the right choice, not because she needs the money, but because the money needs her perspective. What we've built should serve purpose beyond accumulation. She understands that instinctively, values what truly matters. The board will resist initially, but they'll recognize it too, given time. Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal. All those years I thought myself disconnected from my brother's life. He had been watching, evaluating, ultimately entrusting me with everything he valued most, not as a charity case, but as someone he genuinely believed would honor and extend his legacy. The realization shifted something fundamental in how I viewed my role here, not as an accidental heiress struggling to manage an unexpected burden, but as the deliberately chosen steward of something precious. Chosen specifically for qualities I possessed but had never fully valued in myself. That evening, I sat on the ranch house porch, watching sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Ranch hands were returning from distant pastures, horses and ATVs kicking up small dust clouds along the access roads. In the distance, cattle moved like dark shadows against the golden landscape. My landscape now, my responsibility. My opportunity to create meaning from abundance. The phone in my pocket vibrated. A text message from an unknown Miami number. "Need to talk. Things complicated here. M. Mason." After 3 months of silence, reaching out now. The old me would have responded immediately, desperate for any connection with my estranged son. The new me considered more carefully what healthy boundaries might look like, what conditions might need to be established before any conversation could be productive. I set the phone aside without responding, not as rejection, but as thoughtful pause. Tomorrow would be soon enough to decide how or whether to re-engage with the son who had walked away when manipulation failed. Tonight was for appreciating how far I had come in my own transformation from uncertain inheritor to purposeful steward. The Texas stars emerged one by one as darkness claimed the land, each pinpoint of light a reminder of possibility in vastness. I breathed deeply, filled with unexpected contentment and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. "The Miami police have no record of him at that address for the past month," Martinez reported, closing his notebook. "Landlord says he left owing 3 months' rent. 6 months had passed since Mason's text message. My cautious response, offering to speak by phone but not providing financial assistance without a clear plan, had been met with silence. Now, concerned despite everything, I had asked Martinez to discreetly check on my son's whereabouts. His last known employer hasn't seen him either, Martinez continued, but there's a rumor he became involved with some real estate investors with questionable business practices. The implications hung in the air between us. Garrett's journal had detailed Mason's pattern of dubious financial ventures. It seemed he had continued down that path after leaving Texas. "Thank you for checking," I said, pushing aside maternal worry to focus on the day ahead. "Let me know if you learn anything more." Today marked a milestone, the first harvest from the Agricultural Training Center. What had begun as a concept 6 months ago was now a thriving reality. 2 acres of vegetables cultivated using sustainable methods, a small orchard beginning to establish itself, and 20 graduates already employed in agriculture-related positions throughout the county. I drove to the center, still marveling at how quickly the project had progressed from groundbreaking to functional facility. The main building, a practical structure with classrooms, processing areas, and administrative offices, was surrounded by neatly tended demonstration gardens. Solar panels gleamed on the south-facing roof, part of our commitment to environmental sustainability. Dr. Chen met me at the entrance, clipboard in hand. "The local news crew is already here. They want to interview you about the food bank partnership." The partnership was my proudest achievement, a system where program participants grew food that went directly to community members in need, creating a direct connection between learning and meaningful impact. The first delivery, over 2,000 pounds of fresh produce, was scheduled for today. As we walked toward the harvesting area, I spotted a familiar figure among the workers. Sheriff Dawson, dressed in jeans and a work shirt rather than his uniform, helping load crates of vegetables into a delivery truck. "Michael volunteered his Saturday," Dr. Chen explained, following my gaze. "He's been one of our most consistent supporters." Over the past months, the sheriff had become a regular presence at foundation events and ranch functions. Our professional relationship had gradually evolved into friendship, his dry humor and straightforward manner a welcome counterpoint to the complexities of my new life. His insights about the community helped shape foundation priorities, while his stories about Garrett offered glimpses of my brother I would never otherwise have known. After completing the television interview, still an uncomfortable experience despite increasing practice, I joined the Harvest volunteers. There was something deeply satisfying about physical work, after days of meetings and paperwork, about dirt under my fingernails and tangible results. "Impressive yield for first harvest," Michael commented, appearing beside me with empty crates for the tomatoes I was picking. "Garrett would be pleased." "I think he would," I agreed. "Though I'm still finding my own way with all this. That's precisely why he chose you," Michael said, continuing our ongoing conversation about my brother's decision. He didn't want a carbon copy to maintain status quo. He wanted someone who would bring new perspective. As we worked side by side, I found myself sharing my concerns about Mason, the cryptic text, the subsequent silence, Martinez's worrying report. "Complicated situation," Michael acknowledged. "Parental love doesn't simply vanish because a child makes poor choices. I keep wondering if there was something more I could have done, during the divorce or after. Some way I could have prevented Richard's influence from shaping him so completely." Michael considered this as he loaded tomatoes into crates. "My oldest went through a phase where he wanted nothing to do with me. Different circumstances, teenage rebellion rather than parental manipulation, but the pain of rejection felt the same." "How did you handle it?" I asked, curious about this glimpse into his personal life, something he rarely volunteered. "Maintained open door, clear boundaries, let him know love remained constant, even when his behavior was unacceptable." He shrugged slightly. "Eventually he found his way back. Different relationship than before, but solid in its own way." His words offered perspective without easy reassurance, exactly what I needed. The harvest continued throughout the morning, culminating in a community lunch where program participants, foundation board members, and volunteers shared food prepared from the center's first crops. Sitting at long tables under shade trees, people from vastly different backgrounds connected through the simple act of breaking bread together. This, I realized, was Garrett and Elaine's true legacy, not the wealth itself, but its potential to build community, to connect people who might otherwise remain separated by economic circumstance. My role as steward was not just managing assets, but nurturing these connections, these possibilities for meaningful impact. As the event wound down, Eleanor approached, her expression uncharacteristically concerned. "Mrs. Lawson, there's a situation at the main house. Martinez asked me to let you know discreetly." My first thought was of Mason. "What kind of situation?" "Your son has arrived," she confirmed my suspicion. "Apparently in some distress. Martinez has him in the guest house and thought you'd want to be informed before returning." Michael, overhearing, offered to drive me back. "I can stay or go, whatever you prefer," he added, his tone making it clear the choice was entirely mine. "Stay," I decided. I might need the perspective. The drive back to the main property was tense with anticipation. Mason's unexpected appearance after months of silence, described as in distress, suggested trouble rather than reconciliation. Martinez met us at the main house, his professional demeanor firmly in place. "Mr. Lawson arrived approximately 40 minutes ago. He appears disheveled, possibly under the influence of substances. He's demanding to see you immediately." "Financial demands?" I asked, mentally preparing myself. He wasn't specific, just insistent about speaking with you alone. I exchanged glances with Michael, whose subtle nod conveyed both support and caution. "I'll see him in the library," I decided. "Martinez, please remain nearby. Sheriff Dawson will accompany me initially." The man waiting in the library barely resembled the confident manipulator who had arrived 9 months earlier. Mason's expensive clothes had been replaced by wrinkled khakis and a stained polo shirt. His hair was unkempt, his face gaunt with dark circles shadowing bloodshot eyes. "Mom," his voice cracked slightly on the word. "Finally." "Mason." I kept my tone neutral, assessing. "This is Sheriff Dawson, a friend of the family." Mason's gaze darted to Michael, then back to me, calculation visible even through his apparent distress. "I need to speak with you, privately." "Sheriff Dawson will stay for now," I replied firmly. "What brings you back to Texas?" A series of emotions crossed Mason's face: frustration at the thwarted private conversation, desperation, then resignation. "I'm in trouble," he finally admitted. "Serious trouble." "Legal trouble?" Michael asked, his tone professional rather than accusatory. Mason hesitated, then nodded. "The investment group I was working with in Miami. There are investigations, securities fraud allegations. I didn't know what they were doing, not really, but my name is on documents." The story unfolded in fragments. A scheme involving foreign investors, falsified property valuations, millions in misappropriated funds. Mason claimed peripheral involvement, insisting he was merely the face for client relations, unaware of the fraudulent back-end operations. Whether this limited culpability was truth or convenient fiction remained unclear. What was evident was his desperation. "They're looking for scapegoats," he concluded. "And with my history, previous ventures that ended problematically, previous victims," I corrected gently but firmly. He flinched but didn't argue the point. "I need help, legal representation, somewhere to stay while this gets sorted out. Not 'I've missed you,' or 'I'm sorry for how I left,' or any acknowledgement of our last painful encounter. Just need, presented with the expectation that maternal obligation would override all previous betrayals." Michael remained silent, his presence a grounding force as I considered my response. The son before me was in genuine trouble. That much was clear, but his approach remained transactional, viewing me primarily as a resource rather than a person with legitimate feelings and boundaries. "I'll need to consider what help I can appropriately offer," I said finally. "You can stay in the guest house tonight while I consult with the ranch's legal team." Relief flooded his features. "Thank you. I knew you'd understand." "Understanding and enabling are different things, Mason." I maintained steady eye contact. "Any assistance would come with conditions: complete honesty, accountability, professional counseling to address the patterns that keep leading you to these situations." The relief faltered, replaced by calculation once again. "Of course, whatever you think is necessary." As he left with Martinez to return to the guest house, Michael remained silent, waiting until we were alone before speaking. "Complicated," he observed simply. "Very." I sank into a chair, emotional exhaustion suddenly catching up with me. He's still seeing me as a means to an end, rather than reconnecting as family. True, but he came here rather than disappearing completely. That's something. I considered this perspective. "You think there's hope for genuine change?" Michael chose his words carefully. I think people can change when properly motivated. Whether his motivation extends beyond immediate self-preservation remains to be seen. His measured assessment reflected my own uncertainties. The mother in me wanted to believe in redemption, in the possibility that this crisis might finally break through the patterns Richard had instilled. The wiser woman I was becoming recognized that true change required more than desperation. It required genuine willingness to do difficult internal work. "What would you do?" I asked, valuing his perspective. "Offer help with accountability attached, clear boundaries, professional support." He smiled slightly. "Essentially what you already proposed." The confirmation of my instincts was reassuring. 9 months ago, I might have simply opened my arms and checkbook without conditions, desperate to reclaim any relationship with my son. Now I recognized that such unconditional rescue would only perpetuate the patterns that had brought him to this point. "I want to help him," I acknowledged, "but not at the expense of enabling further harm, to himself or others." "That balance," Michael said quietly, "is the most profound expression of parental love there is." As evening settled over the ranch, I watched from my study window as lights came on in the guest house. My son was once again under my roof, our relationship still fraught with complications, but now existing in a new context, one where I approached our connection from a position of strength and clarity rather than desperate hope. Whatever came next would be challenging, but for the first time, I felt equal to that challenge, grounded in the person I had become rather than defined by the pain of what had been lost. 1 year, Eleanor marveled, glancing around the transformed ranch office. "Hard to believe you've only been here a year." Exactly 12 months had passed since that surreal day in Thornton's office when I'd learned of my inheritance. The anniversary had prompted reflection on the journey, from overwhelmed newcomer to confident steward, from someone defined by loss to a woman creating meaningful impact. "Sometimes it feels like I've always been here," I admitted. "Other times, like I'm still finding my footing." "You've done more in 12 months than most would accomplish in 5 years, Eleanor countered. "The training center, the expanded foundation programs, the new breeding initiative." She wasn't wrong. The agricultural center now served 60 participants annually, providing skills training while supplying fresh produce to 3 county food banks. The foundation had increased its annual giving by 30% while maintaining responsible fiscal management. The ranch itself continued to thrive under the balanced approach I developed with Eleanor's guidance, honoring tradition while embracing sustainable innovations. But the most significant changes weren't visible on spreadsheets or annual reports. They lived in the growing confidence with which I made decisions, the relationships I'd built within the community, the sense of purpose that infused each day with meaning, and, perhaps most surprisingly, in the cautious rebuilding of connection with my son. Mason's return had indeed marked a turning point, though not the immediate reconciliation either of us might have imagined. The legal troubles he faced were substantial, serious enough that even Thornton's considerable expertise required supplementation from specialists in securities law. I had offered conditional support, legal representation paid through a special trust rather than direct funds, temporary housing in the guest house, and mandatory participation in both financial counseling and psychological therapy to address the patterns that had led to his current situation. Initially, Mason had balked at these requirements, especially the therapy component, but faced with limited alternatives and mounting legal pressure, he had reluctantly agreed. 3 months into this arrangement, something unexpected had begun to emerge, moments of genuine connection amidst the complexity, glimpses of the son I remembered beneath layers of his father's influence. "Mr. Thompson is here for the quarterly review," Martinez announced from the doorway, interrupting my reflection. Thornton entered with his customary professional demeanor, though our months of working together had softened the formality between us. "Mrs. Lawson, the foundation audit is complete, exemplary results across all metrics." We settled into reviewing the detailed reports, financial performance, program outcomes, administrative efficiency. The numbers told a story of thoughtful stewardship and meaningful impact, of resources directed toward genuine community needs rather than simply perpetuating wealth for its own sake. "I have something else to discuss," Thornton said as we concluded the review. "A personal matter. Mr. Wilson, your brother, left instructions that I should give you this after your first year managing the estate." He placed a sealed envelope on the desk between us. My name was written in Garrett's distinctive handwriting. "I'll leave you to read it privately," Thornton offered, rising. No, please stay, I requested, suddenly wanting a witness to this final communication from my brother. With careful fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the single page within. Dear Audrey, if you're reading this, you've successfully navigated your first year as steward of what Elaine and I built together. I never doubted you would rise to the challenge, though I imagine you had plenty of doubts yourself. When we were children, you always showed a quiet strength our mother called steel and silk, gentle in approach, but unbreakable at the core. Life's challenges may have caused you to forget that strength, but I never did. I chose you as my heir, not despite your teaching background, but because of it. You understand that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in lives improved, potential realized, community strengthened. The money and property are simply tools toward those greater purposes. By now, you've likely faced challenges I anticipated. Your son's reaction to your inheritance, perhaps, and many I couldn't foresee. The fact that you're reading this letter means you've navigated them with the integrity and wisdom I always knew you possessed. The ranch, the foundation, the business, they're truly yours now, to shape according to your vision. My legacy isn't what I built, but what you'll do with it. With pride and love, your brother. Garrett. Tears blurred my vision as I set the letter down. Even now, a year after his death, Garrett had found a way to offer both validation and challenge, acknowledging the journey while encouraging the path forward. He had remarkable foresight, Thornton observed quietly. Yes, I agreed, thinking of how accurately Garrett had predicted Mason's reaction, the community's initial skepticism, my own growth into the role he'd chosen for me. I wish I'd known him better in life. In many ways, you've come to know him through his legacy, Thornton suggested, and he knew you well enough to entrust you with everything that mattered to him. The truth of this observation settled around me like a comfortable shawl. Through managing the ranch, expanding the foundation, and connecting with those who had known him, I had indeed developed a deeper understanding of my brother than our limited interactions in life had allowed. Later that afternoon, I drove to the training center where the spring graduation ceremony was underway. 60 participants, ranging from teenagers to seniors, all from backgrounds where opportunity had been limited, were receiving certificates in sustainable agriculture practices, food processing, and business management. From the back of the gathering, I watched as Dr. Chen called each name as graduates crossed the modest stage with pride emanating from their postures. These were not just students completing a program, but individuals whose life trajectories had been meaningfully altered. Quite a sight, isn't it? Michael's voice came from beside me as he joined me in observing the ceremony. Our friendship had deepened over the months, gradually evolving into something neither of us had rushed to define, but both increasingly valued. Worth every dollar invested, I agreed, and then some. He nodded toward a young woman receiving her certificate. Maria there was facing potential jail time for minor offenses before the court approved this program as an alternative. Now she's been hired by the county extension office. Complete turnaround. Second chances. Transformation. Potential recognized and nurtured. These themes had come to define not just the foundation's work, but my personal journey as well. After the ceremony, I mingled with graduates and their families, listening to stories of challenge and triumph. Several mentioned plans to establish community gardens in neighborhoods previously classified as food deserts, extending the program's impact far beyond individual participants. As the gathering dispersed, I noticed a familiar figure standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the property. Mason, observing from a distance. His appearance had improved significantly over the months of structured support. Clean-shaven, properly dressed, clear-eyed, external reflections of the internal work he was slowly, sometimes reluctantly, undertaking. I approached him, curious about his unexpected presence at the foundation event. I didn't know you were coming today. My therapist suggested I should see what you're actually doing with all this, he admitted, gesturing toward the facility, beyond the spreadsheets and reports. And? I prompted, when he fell silent. He looked uncomfortable, struggling visibly with whatever he wanted to express. It's not what I expected, he finally admitted. When I first came here, I saw the money, the property, the potential for personal gain. I didn't see this. His gesture encompassed the graduates still chatting in small groups, the productive gardens stretching beyond the main facility, the tangible sense of community and purpose that permeated the space. Dad always taught me that wealth was about accumulation and status, Mason continued, his voice quieter now, about having more than others, controlling more than others. I never considered it could be about creating something that helps people become more self-sufficient. The mention of Richard's teachings, spoken now with critical awareness rather than reverent repetition, suggested the therapy might be having more impact than I'd realized. That's what Garrett and Elaine understood, I said carefully. That wealth without purpose becomes a burden rather than a blessing. Mason nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful in a way I hadn't seen since he was a curious child, before Richard's influence had narrowed his perspective to transaction and manipulation. My legal situation is improving, he offered, changing the subject slightly. The evidence shows I wasn't involved in the planning stages of the fraud, just the execution. The prosecutor is considering a reduced charge in exchange for testimony against the primary organizers. That's positive news, I acknowledged, genuinely relieved for him despite the complicated history between us. I'll still face consequences, he continued, a new accountability evident in his tone. Probably some kind of probation, financial penalties, restrictions on future business activities, but not prison. The relief in his voice was palpable. For all his bravado during his first visit to the ranch, Mason had been genuinely terrified of incarceration, a fear that had ultimately driven him to accept the therapy and accountability measures I'd required. What will you do afterward? I asked, curious about whether he was developing any forward vision beyond crisis management. He hesitated, seeming almost embarrassed. Actually, I've been talking with the Foundation's financial literacy coordinator. They need people who understand banking and investment structures to develop educational programs for low-income communities, using my knowledge to help people avoid predatory schemes instead of creating them. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The skills he had previously used for exploitation potentially redirected toward protection and education. Whether this represented genuine transformation or merely pragmatic adaptation remained to be seen, but it was movement in a direction I wouldn't have predicted a year ago. It would be a probationary position, he added quickly. Supervised, no access to foundation funds, just a chance to do something constructive while I figure out what comes next. The request hidden within this explanation hung between us. His first approach to involvement that acknowledged his limitations and accepted appropriate boundaries, not demanding control or resources, but offering to contribute within carefully defined parameters. I'll speak with Dr. Chen about the possibility, I said, neither promising nor dismissing the idea. The Foundation has strict hiring protocols. I understand, he nodded, accepting this measured response without the frustration or manipulation tactics he might have employed months earlier. Thank you for considering it. As we walked together toward the parking area, Mason glanced at me sideways. That sheriff seems to be around a lot. The observation carried no judgment, just careful curiosity. My relationship with Michael had evolved gradually from professional connection to friendship to something more personal, though we had both moved at a deliberate pace, respecting the significant life transitions each of us was navigating. Michael has been a good friend, I replied simply. He knew Garrett well, helps me understand the community better. Mason nodded, seeming to accept this explanation without pressing for details, another small sign of growing respect for boundaries. As we reached our separate vehicles, he paused awkwardly. Mom, I know sorry doesn't begin to cover everything, but I am sorry for disappearing after the divorce, for showing up just for the money, for trying to manipulate you. The apology, while imperfect, held a genuineness I hadn't heard from him in years, not a tactical maneuver, but a halting step toward accountability. Thank you for saying that, I acknowledged, neither dismissing the apology nor offering instant absolution. We have a long road ahead to rebuild trust, but this is a start. He nodded, accepting this measured response as fair. See you at the ranch later? Yes, Eleanor's team is grilling for the staff tonight. You're welcome to join. As I watched him drive away, I reflected on the parallel journeys we were both undertaking. Mine from uncertain inheritor to confident steward. His from manipulator to someone cautiously exploring more constructive possibilities. Neither transformation was complete or guaranteed, but both represented movement towards something healthier than where we had begun. The evening gathering at the ranch house brought together the disparate threads of my new life. Eleanor and the ranch management team, Martinez and the security staff, Dr. Chen and several foundation board members, Michael arriving after his shift ended, and Mason tentatively navigating this community where his previous assumptions about wealth and power held no currency. As twilight settled over the property, I found myself on the main porch with Michael, watching fireflies begin their evening dance over the expansive lawn. "Quite a year," he observed, his shoulder companionably touching mine as we leaned against the railing. "Sometimes, I still expect to wake up back in my Kansas apartment, discover this was all an elaborate dream." He smiled at this. "And if you did, wake up and find yourself back there?" I considered the question carefully. I'd miss this place, the work, the purpose, but I'd know now what I didn't fully understand then, that my value was never tied to my circumstances or bank account, that I had strength within me all along, just waiting for the right challenge to emerge. "That's what Garrett saw in you," Michael noted. "What those of us who've come to know you see clearly now." His hand found mine on the railing, a gesture both casual and significant. We had been moving slowly towards something more than friendship, neither of us rushing a connection that felt increasingly important to get right. From inside came the sounds of conversation and laughter, Mason's voice unexpectedly rising above others as he apparently shared some story that elicited genuine amusement rather than calculated response. A small victory perhaps, but meaningful in context. "I received a letter from Garrett today," I said, explaining the anniversary message Thornton had delivered. "He wrote that his legacy isn't what he built, but what I'll do with it." "Wise man, your brother." "I'm beginning to understand just how wise," I agreed. "He gave me not just resources, but the opportunity to discover capacities within myself I might never have recognized otherwise." The ranch stretched before us, cattle moving like shadows in the distant pastures as night settled over the land. My land now, not just legally, but in the deeper sense of connection and responsibility. Not a burden to be managed, but a legacy to be honored through thoughtful stewardship. 1 year ago, I had been a retired school teacher with modest savings and a painfully estranged relationship with my only child. Today, I stood as the owner of one of Texas's significant cattle operations, the chairperson of a foundation making meaningful community impact, and a woman discovering new dimensions of strength, purpose, and even possibility for connection, both with my slowly recovering son and with the thoughtful man beside me. The transformation wasn't complete. Such journeys never truly are. Mason's path toward healthier patterns remained uncertain, requiring ongoing accountability and support. My own growth as a leader and steward continued to evolve with each new challenge and opportunity. The Foundation's work addressing community needs would always face more demand than resources could fulfill. But standing on the porch of what was now undeniably my home, watching fireflies illuminate the gathering darkness with their transient, hopeful light, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of being exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Garrett's final gift hadn't been the cattle or money or property, substantial though they were. It had been the opportunity to discover that I had always possessed the capacity to create meaningful impact, to stand firmly in my own authority, to balance compassion with appropriate boundaries. The wealth was simply the tool. The true inheritance was the chance to become fully myself. As the Texas night deepened around us, stars emerging in constellations I was finally learning to name, I silently thanked my brother for seeing in me what I hadn't yet recognized in myself, and for creating the circumstances where that recognition could finally emerge. "Ready to go back inside?" Michael asked after comfortable silence had stretched between us. "Yes," I decided, turning toward the warm light spilling from the house windows. "I'm ready."